Over the past century, Atlantic Baptists have seen many changes. Methods of speaking the gospel have changed. Institutions have been founded with little or no monetary support. And centuries of racial barriers are being eroded. This short film will tell some of these stories. The topics presented here are ones that exemplify the witnessing, teaching, and serving of Atlantic Baptists in the context of Atlantic Canadian life. And there are many more just like these. Examples and stories of how Atlantic Baptists have led the way in the religious, social, and educational life of Atlantic Canadians. Evangelism has always been a focal point for Atlantic Baptists. Birthed out of the revival period, most Atlantic Baptist churches have always had a heart for reaching out to the communities around them. There have been a number of approaches to evangelism practiced throughout the century. These evangelistic styles demonstrate how Baptists have creatively shared the gospel with society in each new generation.
No question that throughout the whole period, preaching has been the core instrument of evangelism in Atlantic Baptist life, and I think in evangelical churches throughout Atlantic Canada.
You really don't have to go too far back in our history to realize that when it comes to evangelism, the ethos in our convention has been basically that you do evangelism by proclaiming. And it's basically been from the pulpit. So it's been a proclamation style of evangelism. You could put different words in there. You could call it revival evangelism. You could call it crusade evangelism. And that's not a bad thing. It's just that's our history. When you consider the fact, for example, that 75% of our churches in the Convention of Atlantic Baptist Churches were formed before the year 1900. They came into existence before 1900. That's significant because they were born out of revival movements. They were formed in revivals.
As the world moved past the two great wars, evangelistic methods would begin to change. After World War II, there was no question that the world was not the same place it had been. This period saw explosive growth for churches, with the number of Atlantic Baptists growing to be about 70,000 in 1964. Crusade evangelism would become the prominent style of evangelism in the post-war period. This style would see local churches teaming together to support a visiting evangelist. For an allotted period of time, this evangelist would hold crusades where people were invited to come, listen to the gospel, and respond to it publicly.
If you want to have an evangelistic impact, you invite somebody to come and preach. And of course, ever since Billy Graham in the last 60 years arrived on the scene with that remarkable God-given gift that has taken him around the world and been a blessing to so many and has won so many, since then there's been a tendency, in my judgment, for churches to back off, to say, if we want to have evangelism, let's have Billy Graham, or let's have Franklin Graham, or let's have Louis Palau, or let's have somebody else. Which really says, let's have somebody do it for us. And I think that element in crusade evangelism has been one of the weaknesses of our witness.
The Home Mission Board used to call evangelists, part-time evangelists, to go out to home mission churches, and their primary task was to preach and to bring people to salvation in Christ. And when you look at report books, at the annual report books in those early years, from 1900 up to 1950, for example, the reports that were given from the Home Mission Board about the churches was in terms of, these are the number of people who were saved. These are the number of people who were baptized. These are the number of people who came forward as a result of the preaching ministries of these home mission pastors or home missionaries, or the ones who were called to be evangelists just for the summer kind of thing. That's what they needed to do, was to go out and preach. And even the number of sermons that they preached and how many people came forward as a result of that.
Atlantic Baptists began to realize that although numbers were strong, there was a need with the coming generations that the church was not filling.
I think there's a growing understanding or a growing sense that the crusade evangelism, while having been an effective method, it's losing its effectiveness today. It's not that it can't still be effective, but dynamics have changed in society. Part of the reason that crusades were as effective as they were is that relationships were intact in communities, and the other factor, I think, was that there was a general understanding in society and in our culture of the basics of Christianity and just the fact that, well, God is, and you can't assume that today. I think there's a general sense of frustration with the ineffectiveness of things that used to be effective, and so there's a dissatisfaction that's creating an openness to learning and saying, there has to be something different than what we have experienced. There has to be something more than what we've been doing. So what is it? And so there's an openness to explore and to think about, these things that are coming along.
Because of these changing factors, Atlantic Baptists began investing in a more personal style of evangelism.
You have to help people learn some very basic lessons about how to be in touch with people in a way that relates to their context and doesn't simply impose our agenda. When I teach evangelism, for example, one of the things I say to my students is, if you're going to make an impact through your life, you must first find common ground with those you're trying to impact. If you don't find common ground, you might as well stay home. And if that means you have to make adjustments, you're simply following the Apostle Paul's rule. I am become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. So lifestyle evangelism is different in that sense. And it certainly changes the direction in terms of evangelism as we normally practice it, from being a come to us to a let's come to you, or let's go to them.
People are less and less, as you say, willing to respond to being preached at. And it's like, well, by what authority do you speak? That's the issue. You have to gain authority to speak into my life. And so I think the gospel really has to be moved from that type of proclamation to more a dialogue type of thing, where it's inserted in the dialogue that's encapsulated itself in a relationship. And there is an authority, I think, and it becomes a personal authority. And this is from the non-Christian perspective, that I then gain an authority to speak into their lives by genuinely caring for them and being connected to them and being a part of their lives. I think there's an integrity issue there in that, and it speaks to us as Christians that I need to be real in people's lives. I can't see them as my project. I can't have an ulterior motive. My motive always is for the best for them, and that includes talking to them about their relationship with God, but it's not, even if they don't, integrity in the relationship says that I still remain your friend. And even if they reject everything that is dear to me, I remain, their friend and remain involved in their lives. It's not, okay, you're rejecting Christ, you don't want to have anything to do with that. Well, I don't want to have anything to do with you. That just says there wasn't integrity there to begin with. But yeah, it has to move from the proclamation to the dialogue kind of thing. We kind of miss that sometimes in the Acts 2 passage. What we tend to see is Peter preaching and 3,000 people coming to the Lord. And then we read about more and more being added to the Lord daily. But in between that is this community. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, and to the breaking of bread, and to prayer, and praising God, and enjoying the favor of all the people. So the people around this neophyte church here, they enjoyed having the church in their midst. They enjoyed the favor. The people around were favorably inclined toward this church. I think that's kind of neat. But what they were seeing was community, and no one was excluded, not even these people. They benefited from them being there, And that's the issue of community. And we tend to forget that, that's part of that Acts story. And we look at the preaching by Peter and the fact that more and more were added to the Lord, to the church as they were saved, kind of thing. And but right in the middle of it there is the community.
One of the most active arms of evangelism within the Convention of Atlantic Baptist Churches is found among the ministries of Atlantic Baptist Youth. Reverend Bruce Fawcett is the Director of Youth and Family Ministries within the Convention.
Yeah, the churches of our convention, we believe, touch more youth weekly than any other organization in our society except the public school system. We would run about 5,000 youth in terms of the numbers that are ministered to, and an average attendance of around 4,000 youth each week.
Tidal Impact is a large missions-oriented conference hosted by the Atlantic Baptist Youth.
Tidal Impact is, the nature of the event is very unique to Atlantic Baptist. And it has its roots in the early to mid-'80s when there were some churches that were commissioning short-term youth teams from their churches. And generally what they were doing is evangelistic type programs in the morning, ministries of social concern in the afternoon, and in the evenings gathering together to debrief and to sing and to have some Bible study times as well. And in 1989, as far best as we can tell at this point, was the first time that a number of churches got together and said, hey, let's descend upon the same place together and have a concentrated period of ministry together. And the reaction to that experience from the youth and the leaders was very strong. And so the movement began to pick up from there. And every year or two, we would gather in a different place in Atlantic Canada. And the movement just grew each year, from 69 students in 1989 to 1,300 in 2004. So it's been a movement that's been blessed by God and significant in the lives of many young people.
Over the past century, Atlantic Baptists have diversified their evangelism methods to speak to the current cultural climate. It is not that Atlantic Baptists have abandoned older methods for the next best thing. On the contrary, many tried and true methods are still used at the local church level every day. However, this diversity and willingness to listen to the voices of each generation has meant that as new methods come along, Atlantic Baptists are willing to adopt them and strengthen their relevancy in the cultural context. Atlantic Canada has always had problems with the drain of the best and brightest young people to other parts of Canada. This was apparent even within the Baptist denomination at the beginning of the century. Many of the denomination's youth were training at schools in Ontario and New England and were not returning home.
For Christian education or Bible college education, many of them were going outside of the region. And a survey was done after the war, and it was discovered that over 70 Maritime Baptist young people were in Bible colleges elsewhere. And that in itself was not perceived to be the problem, but they did not come back often. And it was felt that this region had experienced a brain drain and lots of outmigration had been a phenomenon for generations, and in fact for 150 years.
One of the most significant institutions in the training of Baptist youth was Acadia University. This institution was the crown jewel for many Atlantic Baptists. During a period of growth in the 1920s, the School of Theology at Acadia University was founded and based in Sawyer Hall.
And that's due to a complete reorganization of the university. It's that during the 20s that you get all sorts of departments starting in the university that we never had before, things like economics, sociology, and they redo the whole structure of the university. So that's when the Department of Theology comes into its own.
Questions were raised when in the 1940s talk turned to founding another educational institution within the convention.
Now, United Baptist Bible Training School is best understood in the context of the post-war period. After World War II, lots of men and women come back home. Many of them had delayed education. and were eager to become involved in education. Government support for veterans was there for those who wanted post-secondary education. There was also a change in the youth culture in the post-war period as well. And many young people, especially many Christian young people and many Maritime Baptist young people, were very keen, maybe not necessarily to become ordained ministers, but were very keen to be involved in Christian work. And for that population, Acadia University didn't necessarily offer what was best.
Indeed, over the first few years of its life, United Baptist Bible Training School would see a number of changes in its purpose and the population it served.
So in its origins, it was to be essentially high school level for people who were called into ministry later. But within 5 years, that changes fairly dramatically because it becomes, to all intents and purposes, a Christian high school with, in fact, Bible college courses also being offered. So it changes in its formulation within that first 5 years because so many of those students were coming without their high school that they then needed to go back and to finish their high school education.
I think one of the aspects of this whole equation that the founders underestimated was the fact that high schools were still relatively scarce in the region, especially in rural areas in this period. And so it was the practice, for example, if you were in Grand Manan in the immediate post-war period, there was no high school for you. And in many rural areas, you would have to move to towns or cities to finish high school. And so UBBTS, as it became known, became a very important place for people to finish their high school. And so it became very effective, provided very good high school education in the 1950s, as well as other kinds of courses that would help in ministry, in Christian education, in practical acts of service. Coming out of the local church. And for the 1950s, they really formed their identity. And it seems to me those two factors, young people wanting education so that they can serve Christ more effectively in the local church and on the mission field or whatever. There were some, too, who were wondering about whether or not God was, in fact, calling them to ministry, and they came to UBITS as well to explore that and to get some practical service experience. And then those, quite frankly, who wanted to finish high school. And so the bulk of the students through most of the 1950s would have been those who were finishing high school and also taking some courses that would benefit them as Christian lay people.
Meanwhile, in Nova Scotia, Acadia University was under increasing pressure from the alumni and senior administration to break ties with the Baptist Convention. Arguing that the convention could no longer support the rapidly growing institution financially, a motion was made in the Nova Scotia Legislative Assembly that called for a change in the structure of the university's Board of Governors. This legislation would pass in 1965, and the crown jewel of the United Baptist denomination would become a secular university.
And the Baptists basically come to realize that they just cannot financially continue to support the university to the degree that it needs to be for it to expand and to give more opportunities for young people. And that sort of goes alongside of the theological issues that are coming up through the denomination itself at the same time. And I think Dr. Wilson would say that there's no question that there is a more conservative aspect to the denomination as we go through the 1960s.
When the province took over Acadia, it in fact did not give any kind of recompense to the denomination for all that the denomination had put in over all those years. They gave us the right to build our own building on land we used to own, and only for 99 years at that. The lease is only for 99 years. But it did a favor to the denomination in that the denomination got direct control of its own theological education again, and it had essentially lost that for a period of time. So the Divinity College will then move distinctly to the theological right and will reflect the people in the pews much more than it had up until the mid-60s.
With Acadia University becoming a secular university, more of the denomination's attention was given to the United Baptist Bible Training School. Over the next few decades, UBBTS was developed into a post-secondary institution where young people could receive a biblically based undergraduate degree.
UBBTS becomes Atlantic Baptist College in 1970. Now, to understand that name change, we really need to go back and look at what's really going on in the 1960s. And in the 1960s, government money earmarked for education makes its way into rural areas. There's a population increase in rural areas as there was in the post-war period. Baby boomers, for example, need to be educated and in rural areas. And so high schools are being built in rural areas in maritime Canada, which meant that the flow of students from the rural areas looking to complete their high school at UBBTS began to decline. As a result, some people began to ask the question whether or not UBBTS should continue at all or in the form that it had been. And it could have gone two ways. It could have been completely redefined as a place where young people would go just for a year of practical Bible training and then move on to something else. For Stuart Murray, who became the president in the late 1960s, that was not the preferred option. And he and others envisioned a college that would be a junior arts college in the Christian tradition, rooted in the Christian tradition, as well as a college that would continue to train people in practical Christian living and Christian training. And consequently, in 1970, Atlantic Baptist College began to offer a 2-year liberal arts, associative arts program in which you could do the first 2 years of a 4-year Bachelor of Arts degree at Atlantic Baptist College. And so the name change suggests or is indicative of these broader changes.
But we then moved essentially then in the mid-'80s away from the Bible College setup and dynamic very much to the Christian liberal arts institution. It's in the midst of that in the early 80s, getting the right to grant degrees from the province of New Brunswick and beginning then to do more than just the 2-year Associate of Arts, to begin to do a 4-year degree program.
By the late 80s and moving into the 1990s, the degree offerings and the options for majors within the baccalaureate programs began to expand. And in addition to biblical studies, there was history, there was sociology, psychology, and even later on communication studies and a variety of other options. And so it became obvious that a name change would be desirable, not because there was anything wrong with the word college, but college actually denoted, at least in this region, the idea of a community college, or not an institution that would grant degrees, in fact. And so in 1996, the name was changed. Baccalaureate degrees, Bachelor of Arts degrees continued to be granted, and offerings were expanded, and a Bachelor of Science program was established as well. It was thought that we needed to move beyond the arts programs if we were going to call ourselves a university. So a Bachelor of Science program was added. Business was added in this period as well. And later in the 1990s, the Bachelor of Arts, the Bachelor of Education program was added as well. And what this has done is essentially provided 3 different categories of baccalaureate degrees that we offer: Bachelor of Business Administration, a Bachelor of Arts in a variety of options, and a Bachelor of Science. And with these accomplishments, it became clear that Atlantic Baptist University was, in fact, a university.
Today, Atlantic Baptist University and Acadia Divinity College are schools that complement each other. Atlantic Baptist University offers a biblically based liberal arts undergraduate education, while Acadia Divinity College trains men and women in many areas of full-time ministry.
One of the things that happened, particularly in the late 70s and early 80s, was that Atlantic Baptist College in particular made a conscious move to decide that the Bible College part of the program, which was feeding into our churches some older students who come for a 3-year Bible program and then go on into ministry, that would begin to shift that and really strongly stress the fact that undergraduate training at Atlantic Baptist University, graduate training and theological education, Acadia Divinity College. So that particularly from our perspective at Atlantic Baptist College in those days was a conscious move to be supportive of what was happening at Acadia Divinity College in terms of theological education. And so we encouraged a lot of our students who would do an Associate of Arts and then a degree to come along to Acadia Divinity College and finish their program here. And as a professor here, it's always been a sort of bright spot for me to see how many come from Atlantic Baptist University to become students here and to see how well they do. Because I'd spent 20 years teaching at Atlantic Baptist College, and now I'm 15 years at Acadia Divinity College. And for me, it's been important to see that kind of relationship and that kind of building. People have, by the way, people have sometimes asked me, why did I leave Atlantic Baptist College to come to Acadia Divinity College when so much of my life had been spent at ABC and a lot of my friends are there. And for me, it's been a real question of how can we build our work as a Baptist community in Atlantic Canada more effectively. And I felt that if we're going to have closer ties between the two institutions, that might be the place to start, to begin to have some significant linkages of people who had experience in both. It's interesting that the two longest-serving faculty members now at Acadia Divinity College are Glenn Wooden and I. Both are graduates of Atlantic Baptist College, and now we're teaching here. So that there is, in that kind of way, some linkage, I think, that's taking place. And I think the relationship between the two schools is as strong now as it has ever been. And for me, that bodes well for our future as a convention.
The African Baptist Association has served the thriving communities of people of African descent within the Convention of Atlantic Baptist Churches. This service has in many ways revolved around the hard work and dedication of the pastors of the AUBA.
First, when we speak about the AUBA and serving within the African United Baptist Association, we're talking primarily about the pastors who have been the key facilitators of service in the churches and the community. And often that is not widely understood because the pastors not only just offer services in church or the community, but also they have been and continue to be the key facilitators in all our communities. Pastors preach the message of hope and celebration. They were instrumental in creating and maintaining the relative peace in the communities. And as you look into the history books, the pastors were key in all that transpired within the black community. In addition to serving the communities, this small association has also raised key leaders for our convention within the last 100 years. And we all in our community and even within this convention remember the late Reverend Dr. William P. Oliver. He's not only revered in our community, but he did so much for all of us, and we've just been making sure that this generation of leaders have the same kind of passion and tenacity to stay with the people, but also in our service for the Lord. So he became president of convention in 1960, and I don't think that is, readily knowledgeable within our convention, but he was one of those who embraced the opportunity and was able to get into convention work. And we want to thank him for that, because that kind of leadership is what we are still following today. And then Reverend Dr. Renfred Bryant, who became the first Associate General Secretary of Convention.
We began ministry together in 1961, October the 3rd. And I well remember that when we came from Montreal, because I had never been to Nova Scotia before. And I remembered when we came along the Bedford Highway and he turned up, and I said, "How much further?" "Oh, just a little way up, just a little way up." I knew we were coming to two rural churches, but I had no idea what rural life was in Nova Scotia then. But however, it was great once I got settled in, and Ren and I really enjoyed our ministry in both Hammond's Plains, which is a very different church today, well known, of course, and where our godson is the pastor. And also, Lucasville Church was just a small church with this pot-bellied stove. So, you know, coming from Montreal, everything was so different. But we worked together, and, you know, once we got to know the people, and they loved Ren, and I got busy with the girls and ladies' work. So this was a ministry together. But each step of the way, it wasn't anything that Ren looked for. He never wanted position for himself, but it was the opening things that God had brought into his life.
There is a Negro spiritual that comes to mind as we reflect on the past 100 years. We've come a long way, Lord. We've come a mighty long way. In addition to spiritual ministries, AUBA pastors also occupied senior leadership positions in the various communities. It is important to note that behind every organization or agency that was born to serve people of African descent in Nova Scotia, pastors were in the forefront of the advocacy effort, and that still remains today. This is a demand on our pastors that has been very unique in the makeup of our AUBA and exhibits yet another strength in the serving pastors of the last 100 years. Most, if not all, the older pastors of the last 100 years had to be bivocational pastors. To have provided spiritual leadership as well as community leadership over and above their jobs and family responsibilities is indeed something to both remember and to celebrate. Reverend Dr. Donald Fairfax is one of the living legends from that era. He recalls both the joys and the challenges of the time as he pastored 2 churches while holding various government jobs.
How was your time divided? Well, it was a sort of day and night job. I served a working people who were not available in the evening, during the day, and everything mainly that was done in the church was done in the evening, except for funerals. Weddings, you could always schedule those in the off hours or weekends type of thing. Funerals, of course. Not having taken any vacation all those years, I never took vacation. Reserved my vacation for funerals and for other church duties that required my time during the day. I could always arrange to have a day off because that was coming to me, you see. So that worked out very well.
Wherever you go in the various AUBA communities, the names of pastors, both past and present, are remembered. They have left indelible marks on people and communities with great acts of service and commitment. And some of these pastors also received home mission support to supplement their incomes. Together, we grew stronger the last 100 years.
When you think of Atlantic Baptists serving their community, there are a number of programs that come to mind. Scouts, food banks, meals for shut-ins. All of these happen every day in Atlantic Canada. However, one ministry that likely does not enter the mind of most Atlantic Baptists is its support of ministry in prisons. Serving in this area every day are Baptist pastors, chaplains, and laypersons involved in everything from counseling to baking for inmates around the region.
When we talk of the history connected, I suppose, with Charlie and with the Divinity College, some of this is oral history and some of it's more documented history. But the story I'm told is that early on, when Charlie was teaching clinical pastoral education, a group of students were traveling to Kentville to go to their placement, which was the sanatorium, which is the old Miller Hospital in Kentville. And one student along the way said that she had an interest in working with prisoners. And I'm told that Charlie said, well, maybe we should drop you off at the jail and we'll go to the sanatorium. And just that easy and casual, I guess. And so she did her placement there. And then from there, it's certainly grown out of that.
I recall when I'd be probably 16 or 17 in a young people's group of going around the poorer end of the town taking pictures. They're taking a picture of the jail and the area where they allowed them to come out and get some recreation. And I'm coming to a young people's group with these pictures and saying, well, now we say we're Christians, but what's going on here? Why aren't we doing something about this?
When you think of prison ministry, it's I like to think of it more as a continuum, but there are maybe some significant spots along that continuum where we might divide as to a person's level of involvement. And front line are certainly the chaplains who are based either in the prison, or you have community chaplains too who work mainly with released offenders or with families of offenders, or who work with some of those needs that are community based. Then the next group, I think sort of a middle group in some ways, are the volunteers, and they would be you or I, anyone in a local church who goes in with a group and meet with prisoners there. And again, it may be within the prison, or it may be on the outside too, and some of the through some of the community chaplaincies. And again, there are kind of varying degrees within that. Some will go in and meet with the prisoners. Some might be involved in letter writing. Others might be involved in support to their family, or others who are in that sense. And then on the other end, you have some who might never meet a prisoner face to face, but are certainly involved in ministry as well. And these would be some of the people in different church groups who would do baking for groups going in, because that's a big part of a group going into a prison, taking in home-baked food. That's a really visible expression of care. So I think within those three areas, we need to see it as a very broad spectrum, that there's some who would see it as their calling in chaplaincy, and others see it as part of their Christian witness and service. And then others who may not have contact, but certainly are very supportive of the whole ministry. Prison ministry is about recognizing that all are made in God's image, that we all stand in need of God's grace, and that there are no limits to God's grace either. And when I say we all stand in need, I go back to what I said earlier, that volunteers coming in and prisoners together, we stand together in need of God's grace.
And I recall kneeling to receive the elements of communion at the altar with a lifer on either side of me. And I tried to process that and thought it was very, very wonderful to be there with them on either side. But as I processed it one day, I thought, gee, maybe this young person is there even more worthily than I am. He can experience the depth of where else can I turn? Only you have eternal life.
I think so important to it is a sense of reliability and dependability in what we do. That if I'm someone who has never experienced love, then it's going to take me a while to know that it's real from someone else. So I can go in with an easy message and leave and never see a person again, or I can go in and journey with them, and that is much more significant than an easy, quick answer to things.
Chap not too far sitting on the floor from me, he was doing a life sentence, and he had a very violent record and was really having a tough time in the prison right then. And he had shared with us through the day. And in the prayer time, one of the volunteers said a prayer specifically mentioning his name. And he leaned over to the person next to him and said, "Did she say my name?" Yes. That somebody to say your name was very powerful for him.
By simply volunteering their time and energy, Atlantic Baptists are preaching the gospel of love to many who may not have had the opportunity to hear the story, and their work is not going unnoticed by the prisoners. Though the century has seen an unprecedented amount of change, Atlantic Baptists have been there every step of the way, witnessing to the society, teaching the youth, and serving those who have been neglected or oppressed. As the new century starts, may our prayer be that we will be truly stronger together.
I can remember when my name first went forward for ordination. Some people thought I was doing it to make a statement and questioned my motivation to seek ordination. But God's plan is perfect. He chose me and gifted me for this ministry. And in the end, it was the congregation of the Prince William United Baptist Church that supported me in my calling. I didn't choose to be ordained. The church chose me.
My father had a vision. His ministries, both as the first black chaplain of the Canadian military and pastor of Cornwallis Street Baptist Church, endeared him to many people of all races. He was a pioneer and opened many doors so that others could follow. He had a vision that the world would be colorblind and that men and women of all races could serve both their God and their country together.
home at quite a young age and got messed up with a lot of different people in a lot of different ways, selling drugs, bootlegging. I did some time in a correctional center, and I met a person there that knew Charlie Taylor, and they took me to a street marathon. And and it started off with Charlie in Charlotte walking me down to get my hair cut and just humbling myself and letting these people love me. I had a hard time with people loving me because I would never let them love me. I didn't know anything about love. I didn't want nothing to do with it because I thought that was for the phony people or the people that go to church every week or people like that. I didn't think I could ever be a part of that circle of love. And Charlie invited me into it, and I've been there ever since.